welcome back to our second episode of Push and Pull Podcast. Back again with Michael Tatham, and today we're about to tackle the question how we do things. So Michael, how we do things?
How do we do things? Well, that's a good question. So
thank you.
Let's start with what we talked about in the last episode, the ignition process. So there's two parts to that. The first is the executive team obviously going through the boot camp experience, called executive boot camp. The idea is that out of that, the sponsor or senior leader that's kind of agreed to go through the experience is able to get the team rallied around using what they've learned or what the organization can learn to apply to 1 to 2 processes in the business.
Yeah, so right. I kind of set you up. I have something prepared, so I just set you up. We usually start with selecting a process. And I know we set the stage in the first episode. Process is the word that no one likes to hear.
No, it means bureaucracy. It means rigidity. It means all these.
We don't need processes, or we don't have a processes, or especially in sales related areas. It's an art. I don't need a process. I don't need to follow anything. It's I'm an artisan. I don't follow checklists, or I don't follow a certain methodology. Let's just bust some myths here. There are processes everywhere, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can't deny it. And I think series of steps with an outcome.
That's true. Even a sales process?
Yeah, more importantly, a sales process. Look, I'm not going to argue that in any process you can just document it and then anyone can do it. I think a big part of that is simplifying it to the point where, okay, now where do we need to apply the training?
Yeah. So
I think that, it's definitely, even myself, I'm a little sensitive about using that word because I think for a lot of organizations, it's considered a commodity. Yeah. It's something that department over there, they do that work. That's not our stuff. They do that. And if that's part of the conversation, then you're not in a good place. Really, everyone should be thinking this way.
Yeah. Plus, also what I felt from my experience is process is usually a word driven or used by people to get rid of people, shrinkflate certain things, lean things up, and get rid of people. That's why the perception usually, I guess you will support that. The perception is usually when you talk about processes and especially process improvement, it's doors shut. People don't want to do that.
Yeah, and it's usually been associated with process engineers or engineers in general, most often applied to a technical problem. Right? You hear about it in technology or manufacturing. You've heard of Six Sigma. There's Lean. I mean, it's been brought across other industries, but I mean, I just go back to critical thinking. That's what this is. I can keep using this word because this is really what it is. And what I really love about it is when you start to embrace this way of thinking, the ability to question why you're doing things, obviously a big part of that. I think I call it bias busting.
Yeah.
We all formulate biases, even in the boot camp experience. I mean, no one has got a job soldering wires to a terminal board. I mean, they don't even do that anymore. That's, since the late 70s or early 80s. But these biases form. And it's really remarkable how quickly they do form and how it can limit your ability to come up with the appropriate solutions to address the problem. So it's just, I love this ability to launch a team, apply a new way of thinking. And look, it's a little bit, you fumble with it a little bit, like anything, new way of doing things. But it's not meant to be so prescriptive that it's like, now you have to think this way and do things this way. And if you don't, then you're not true to it. Yeah. There is a tremendous amount of intuition. There's a tremendous amount of steps in the method itself that, I think everyone does. It's just putting them in the right order.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big element to using it. And I've seen all sorts of problems solved. And, over the course of history for a company, we've had everything from the Hubble telescope and having NASA scientists solve that problem, all the way to a simple loan application in a bank to, erecting buildings in Asia. Yeah. And building them efficiently and effectively to the customer specifications. In automotive, like every industry you can think of, engineers and non-engineers have applied this way of thinking, and it completely revolutionizes the way that the company operates. And it's really wonderful. It's not meant to be bureaucratic. It's meant to be something that's intuitive and it's built into how you do things.
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, it's just like you said it. it's a series of steps that when you continuously do them with the same input, produce the same output. That's what a stable process looks like. And it's non-political, it's not personal. That's why I like talking about processes, because they are documented to a certain extent. You know what you do when you follow them, because you always get the same output. And that's why I enjoy doing that as a foundation to work with teams to improve stuff. But we don't look at or usually don't look at work process. We kind of look at a specific type of processes, end-to-end processes, especially getting the customer on board. And coming back to the title of this podcast, Push to Pull, or Push and Pull, this end-to-end process comes into play. I just want to allude a little bit about what this transition from a push process or a push culture to a pull process or a pull culture looks like.
Yeah, I mean, without giving
too much away,
because it's kind of nice being able to go through that transformation. I know that's an overused word, but it really is what it is. Is you're going from, at a very simplistic level, you're going from an unhealthy organization to one that's, is thriving and growing.
Yeah.
And I mean, how many podcasts are out there right now talking about all the things you can do as a leader to make that happen? And look, they're all valid. They have a lot of great points. So does LinkedIn. But there are very few recipes.
Yeah.
Right? If I want to bake this cake, what recipe do I have to use it, and how do I follow the recipe? So let's identify a little bit with a push organization, and I think all our listeners or viewers can appreciate this. In a push organization, the foundation of it is it's output driven.
Yeah.
Right? The system as a whole is not capable. And you know this because, number one, there's usually high turnover. You've got talent exiting constantly. And then any new individual that comes into the organization has to reinvent the way that things are done, because the system as a whole has not really been looked at before. And maybe there are elements of the system that are working nicely, but it is an output-driven organization, and it thrives off of crisis management and firefighting. That's just how it is, and it's exhausting.
Do you have some examples on what that firefighting or what that looks like practically in an organization? Just for listeners, am I in the push environment?
Yeah.
What are typical signs of that for you?
Yeah, I think that a tremendous amount of redundancy, occurring in meetings, frequent meetings, addressing the same problems over and over again, quick solutions that are only addressing symptoms instead of the roots of the problem. Those are absolutely big ones. Multiple projects launched simultaneously to address the same issue. That tends to come up as well. And I think just a disconnect between departments. So that silo thinking. I can tell you how many organizations. There isn't one client we've had over the years that said, no, we don't have a silo problem. As soon as an organization has more than one person, you got a silo problem.
Yeah.
So I think that it would definitely be a great example of a characteristic of a push organization, is that silo mentality, and really the lack of alignment of people, processes, and technology. Those three elements, they are not coming together seamlessly. And it really is just kind of shoot from the hip, the Wild West, as I had one client many years ago say to me. And it's not sustainable, and it's exhausting.
Yeah, it's the Lucky Luke mentality is nothing you want to thrive on. No. In contrary, what are typical signs when you go through that journey, go through that 2 or 3 years of transformational, continuous innovation? What are typical signs of a pull culture that works?
I think probably the biggest one is that, and go back to workplace culture, I'm kind of stealing this from someone, but it's that idea of on Sunday night, you can't wait to get into work in the morning on Monday morning.
Yeah.
That's all you can think about. And you ask yourself, well, why is that? Well, those simple problems that are existing and that are redundant in the organization, they're no longer landing on your desk. You've worked together as an organization, as a team. You look at it from a systems perspective, and you've solved it. And no matter which new individual comes in to work in that process or that area of the business, they're familiar with what needs to be done to make the system work as a whole. And it's connected end to end. Right? We talk about pull.
Yeah.
Well, really, that word is the perfect word to describe it, because you're no longer having to push. It's like looking at water. You don't have to push water uphill where it just comes back to you again. You pull on the things you need, right? Including your customer. And so there's a definite difference in the type of leadership, whether it be push or pull. In a pull organization, it's much more relaxed. They're looking out for the future, what future opportunities are there, and employees and team members and leaders are not reacting anymore. They've designed a system that's designed exactly to do what it's supposed to do, which is to operate effectively and be capable.
Yeah.
So I think that is at its very simplest form, it's being able to take a lot of that complexity, simplify it, make it more effective in a system as a whole, and then you're spending less energy trying to repair things that were broken before and put that energy into innovating.
Yeah.
That's in essence a pull system.
Just before we would go into a continuous process improvement initiative, we obviously do assess certain things, whether I'm sitting on my island or whether it's a fully integrated pull system. How do we teach clients on how to select the first process or the first initiative worthwhile of looking into?
Yeah, that selection process is very important. There's certain elements, and obviously there's a tremendous amount of detail that can go into this when you're actually doing it. So we handhold the client through that. But I think in essence, the biggest piece is what impact it's going to have on customer.
Yeah.
It may be something, and when I say customer, I'm talking about the one who pays you. Yeah. Just to be clear, everyone's talking internal, external customer. My boss is my customer. In our language at Tatham, the customer is the one that can put you out of business simply by shopping somewhere else.
Yeah.
So yes, there are tons of influences on the customer that are important stakeholders. But number one, got to be integrated and connected to the customer. So whatever initiative you select, it's really a good idea to have that connection. So that's one thing. I think another, and I would even more so now put this ahead of revenue or expense reduction. Certainly, that should be a byproduct. Getting your expenses should fall out of this work when you do it. It should not be something that's driving you to do it. But if you are looking at an area of the business that is heavily, got a heavy amount of expenses, it's usually a good idea to be thinking about it like there's probably a tremendous amount of rework going on there. Maybe quality is not where it needs to be. And so a lot of people are compensating, and that's a good indicator. That's a good place to go. So that's a good selection criteria as well. And then probably the most important would be the general feeling of how it is working within that, whether it be division, process, whatever it might be, of the organization. And if it's taking up or if it's expending a lot of calories, let's put it that way, then that's energy put in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Then you want to resolve that. So those are some key kind of criteria I would argue are important when selecting something.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So we've now selected a process.
Mm-hmm.
We know we have a pain point. We know we throw money at certain things and hope that it's getting better, but it's kind of doesn't. So we don't understand something there. What next?
Well, that comes down to actually getting things launched.
Yeah.
And this is where I would argue, and I'm not trying to put down the competition by any means, but I would argue where the big consulting firms kind of get it wrong. So at this point, you're spending a tremendous amount of time as a consultant, whether you have that industry expertise or not, going in and looking at the operation and going through this discovery process.
Yeah.
We skip that. You might say, well, how could you do that? How could you skip learning about all this stuff?
Yeah, how could you?
Well,
how dare you?
Yeah, exactly. How dare we? We don't really need to know that stuff right now. And our belief is that it's all about selecting the people who already know these things. Whether they know the detail or not is not important. It's that they're in it right now.
Yeah.
And they're going to discover it on their own. So we're going to discover it. The only difference is they're going to be driving that discovery. So the next stage is really to strategically select the right people to resolve whatever process you're looking at tackling. So if let's start with something like a cross-functional process, one that cuts right across the organization, a business process from end to end, customer demand all the way to customer fulfill. Okay? You're going to want to select team members from all the areas in every silo that complete that customer journey. And I'm going to say this again. I know middle managers hate this because they're usually the ones that have to give up the resources to look at something like this. They're like, well, why aren't you including me in that? I know a lot about what's going on as well. And it's like, yes, I'm sure you do. But the idea is not to take your expertise and translate that into a solution. It's to take the people that are doing the day-to-day work that are going to be implementing it and have their ideas come to the surface. So really that's the next stage is selecting the right individuals to participate in this prototype, if you will, as we launch. And then we get them into a boot camp, just as we did the senior leadership team, get them speaking the same language, get a little bit more familiar with what the journey looks like, common experience, And now they're set with the tools and ready to use them.
Yeah.
And there's usually a combination. You get the team members themselves that are on the team that are going to be launching, and then you have some subject matter experts as well, which are really important to this whole endeavor. And the combination of the two, that's when we'd be ready to launch.
Absolutely. And you just said the middle managers, they're very important for a different kind of exercise. It's setting the mandate, even though they might not be the frontline workers in our teams, but their expertise and their knowledge is crucial for setting the mandate. Just expand on it, what a mandate, why it's so important for us to have a mandate for a team.
Yeah, I mean, that's that true North Star for the team. They need to be, there's accountability. It goes back to accountability. So in our speaker language, we talk to that, sometimes as a middle manager, sometimes as a senior leader as well. We call them the champion. Yeah. And so that champion, their sole purpose, they have two big components to this. The first is to set the direction and the mandate for the team. So the mandate would be a goal, if you will, and it have qualitative and quantitative aspects to it. So, and how would you know it's a good mandate? Well, because that champion can say, if I accomplish this, it's going to make me look good. And it's going to make the organization look good. And then you know it's a good mandate. So having those two components are really important. And then the second piece for the champion is their job is they're held accountable for this mandate. So if the team can't meet the mandate, that's on the champion. Yeah. And they also need to be able to break down barriers for the team through this journey. Look, the team is kind of working in their own, there's like an incubation, that's the word you use a lot, Tim. Like that's that incubation phase. So they're working, yes, in a little bit of isolation, but they are still interacting with the organization. They have to. Yeah. Right? But at the same time, if changes are going on outside the organization and they're happening on a daily basis, that's a moving target. So at some point you got to say, this is where we're going to stabilize. So the idea is that the champion's also breaking down barriers. So if the team's struggling getting information, let's say finance is reluctant to provide some information, that's the champion's job as a senior leader to work with finance to say, look, this is what the team's looking for. I need your help. And then there you've got a senior leader that's there going to bat for the team to kind of break down some of those barriers so that, this whole endeavor doesn't last for 2 years because we can't afford to have a team working that long.
And maybe just drumming on the same beat again that we just talked about. In your opinion, what sets apart a mandate that we're aiming for from a classic, I see a problem, let me get a business case, give me some resources, and then I'll never get the resource or anything done? What's the key differentiator for you?
That's a really good question, Tim, actually. So I think if you come in with a mandate that is very profitability or cost driven, I think what ends up happening is they're going to find it. Come hell or high water, that team's going to go and try and find it. And I think that often can steer them in the wrong direction. Yes. But if you have, we could do a whole podcast on mandates, but at a very high level, if you can have a mandate that, as I said before, has that qualitative and quantitative elements in it. And so I'll give you an example. So maybe on the qualitative side, it's you have, and I'll go to a hospital. So if a hospital, you have team members that are overworked. There might be plenty of reasons why the clinicians and the administrative staff and the nurses and so forth are absolutely overworked. So maybe the mandate has to incorporate some sort of element of them not working so hard. Yeah. Right? I don't know if that's the right terminology, but it's some effect has to be qualitative, that the workplace culture there, that the vibe that they get off is it's not such a grind all the time because they're burning out. We all know this since COVID, right? Sure. And then the other side is, okay, from a patient perspective, like if you can create a mandate that is, patient-centric in this instance or customer-centric, and you're pleasing the customer, all the other byproducts that come there. Happy customer, more responsive to them, good quality, great delivery. It's going to have a tremendous impact. Yeah. So I think having those two components really will make a solid mandate and then standing behind it. But here's the other great thing about a mandate. The team ultimately goes, the team goes back to the champion after they've gone through that discovery phase with customers and stakeholders and said to the champion, look, your mandate's phenomenal. It's right on point with what our customer needs are. But there are times where the team has discovered that mandate is in a completely different direction from what the customers and stakeholder needs are. And that's a great opportunity to have a conversation. Yes. And ask yourself, why is that? And look, some champions have said, great, thank you very much. I still want to go in that direction. Either way, the method will reveal. But I think for the most part, champions are pretty good about being open to learning more about what their customers and stakeholders are thinking, and they take the guidance of the team, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I'm just picking up on something you said earlier. Cost cutting or efficiency is not. It's a nice result, but it should never be a mean to an end. And that's, from my perspective, where the mandate, and especially the first step or in the second step of the method, the customer and trying to discover the underlying issue.
Right.
It's customer first, and let quality and how to improve the customer experience guide us, and efficiency and cutting costs are a nice byproduct, but focusing on the quality and the customer first is what we're aiming for and guiding for.
100%. Yeah, you can't cost cut your way to prosperity.
Okay. Well, it would be nice though, but we know that.
Well, unfortunately you lose talent, right? You end up cutting people that bring a tremendous value to the organization. Look, in some instances it has to be done. I get that, but I think it's better to retain that talent. Yes. And redeploy them somewhere else if you feel like you don't require any further capacity.
Yeah, it's just one thing you said, I think, after a year of coaching is we don't want to cut people. It's more like get rid of the BS that they have to deal with on a daily basis. It's more like asking, what could your talent or what could your people do if you don't bother them going through a lot of non-value-added work? What could you do if they free up 10, 20, 30% of their time to be innovative and creative?
Yeah,
I think that's a perspective that we're taking.
Yeah, and that's a hard shift for the listeners. I'm sure they're like, wow, that's a huge paradigm shift, and clearly it's not happening overnight, but that's a pull leadership.
Yeah,
and that transition from push to pull, it's tough because funny. I had this conversation with the CEO last week about this. Because they're in this kind of mode of, we gotta find talent, we gotta find the best talent who know how to do this, who have done this somewhere else. Your typical, plug a hole with someone who's plugged it before, and it's not working very well. They're up to no surprise. But I think the idea is if you can discover those leaders, and we'll start with the leadership. If you can discover those leaders that may not have the current skill sets to make you thrive in a push system, but do have the potential to help you thrive in a pull. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are the types of leaders you want. Unfortunately, you're going to have plenty of push leaders that might help you get to where you are today, but they're not going to be able to take you to where you want to go tomorrow. That's the biggest challenge, is push leaders thrive in a push system. Some can make the conversion, but there are some who their entire careers, their value has been derived from firefighting and fixing problems and being part of that output-driven organization, and they like that culture.
Yes.
And working long hours, they brag about that, and it's not a negative thing. Like, some people just enjoy that type of culture. But if you truly are looking to transition to a pull organization, the one that's integrated and aligned and innovative, you're going to have to start searching for leaders now, even though you're in a push culture, that can thrive in a pull. Because by the time you get there, if you don't have that type of leadership, you're going to be stuck in it. You may never get there.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah. And that's something that stuck out to me in the first conversations we had. It's not about getting rid of the leaders that you have. It's rather having that mindset of what made you successful in the past 10 years. Be thankful for that, be proud of that.
Right.
But get that transition, like you said, what made you successful in the past years might not be the right solution for the problems that lay ahead, mm-hmm. or for the challenges that you might see. And that's, we sidetracked a little bit, coming back to boot camp. Mm-hmm. Why boot camp is not just another training experience? So why, in that sense, why do we try to change that, or not try to change it, but give a system or give an experience that tickles the brain to start thinking in a different way? What are the key exercises or the key talking points in your perspective from boot camp that try to get into that pull transition?
Yeah, there's so much to boot camp, and it's partially a challenging question, but it's a good one. I would say at its purest form, the biggest thing that boot camp's going to do when it comes to mindset change is, instead of just going into the experience and then going through the motions, there's a tremendous amount of experience that does not feel prescribed, or out of the box. And it's true. Every team that goes through boot camp make decisions in different ways, interact in different ways. Some are aligned, some are not. So how they tackle the problems is different. I can't go in and say, this is how this is going to end up. there's some elements to boot camp that are very consistent, but you can't actually predict how every team is going to go, what path they're going to take, right? Because they're slightly different. So I think the power of boot camp, especially the first half of the first day, is that we just throw them into an element that I think for the most part they're used to, which is a push system. So they're used to push systems. So work your magic in your push system.
Yeah, it's like I'm the king of my island, and I'll
king of the island.
Push whatever I do. I throw everything over the fence so that it's not sticking to me, and let's see what happens.
Yeah, and obviously we're over exaggerating it, and
Sure.
We're throwing a whole lot of different scenarios and challenges and burning platforms at once, where it becomes a little bit overwhelming. But that's really how you learn, right? Is what you're saying? Pressure, or diamonds are made under pressure, right?
Yeah. Some people don't like that phrase.
No, they don't, but it's a good one, though. It really is a good one. So we're really putting a lot of that pressure at that first stage. And it's great because that's where we get this first part of the transformation, which is, okay, I can be change ready now. I know that there are certain things we do as a leadership team, as individuals, that help us do really well. And then there are some things that are really hindering our progress.
Yeah.
And then we can pull that out of them. It's not us telling them.
Yeah, it's just from the coach's perspective. I really, even though the first half of the first day is for every participant, it's painful. You don't really like it. It's brain frying. You go through. You're thrown into a system where you're set up for failure.
Yeah.
Period. You try your best. Like in many organizations, you're set up for failure. Yet you still try your best. But that transition of allowing them to use their hot fixing mentality, I get a solution. I have to have a quick solutions. I get into the back room. Let's have a meeting room. Let's have a meeting. Let's have a circle. Let's get the best people together and let them figure it out. This setup for use your ways of doing things, and us building the tension of where we show them that their way of doing things under that set of pressure in that system is going to fail, leads to one of my favorite pictures in that entire slide deck or in that entire bootcamp experience is this burning house, the well, the people trying their best, and the leader in the background just yelling in his cone. I just love that picture because I could relate when I was in the bootcamp myself. Every time we were in the bootcamp so far, people can relate to that picture. It's not just us going through the Model A production piece, but it's also for many people, whether it's an admin process, whether it's a marketing process. This house is burning, I try my best, yet the house is still burning. This is relatable for many people.
Yeah, and I think that's the idea is you're walking away from the morning, without giving too much away here, you're walking away from the morning saying, that's my life or my organization or our culture summed up in 60 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's great because we're able to often, not always, depending on the clients. We have some clients who we cannot record things, but we'll do our best to see if we can record the level of noise in the room and everyone running around, hair on fire, or chicken with their heads cut off kind of thing, and then compare it to the end of day 2.
It's amazing.
From push to pull, and it's like, it's night and day.
Yeah.
Right? And I think probably my favorite part, and one thing I love about podcasts is just free flow. I got to say this, one of my favorite parts about bootcamp is you get to see that evolution. And again, it's different for every client, how they get there. We have some teams that just recently in February, we had a team in an organization that they just didn't like to communicate. They were very quiet, slightly passive aggressive, and they had to be successful, they had to come out of their shell and start communicating. Because this is not one of those sessions where the facilitators are driving it. They have to drive this. And I think that's one of the things I've always loved about facilitating this is they think I'm standing at the front of the room telling what they're doing next and how things are going and spreading all my theory. And what they don't understand is I'm just sitting there asking questions. All the answers reside within them already. I'm just asking them in a way and using Socratic questioning to get them to the destination we need them to go to so that they can really buy into this concept of here we are in a push system. Yes, we agree we're there. How do we get to a pull system? Oh, okay, I actually have to understand more than beneath it. I have to understand beneath the surface. Surface level understanding will not be good enough. Yes, it sucks. Yes, it's tedious. It requires discipline. But really, it's the only way to really change and redesign an organization to go from push to pull. there's no shortcuts.
No.
So
you can try shortcutting, but it'll haunt you.
I've yet to see an organization that can do that. If they can, kudos to them. I'll quit.
Please reach out. We'd like to get.
Yeah, please. If you're listening to this podcast and you're able to accomplish that, please let me know.
Yeah, just back to bootcamp. We just ran a bootcamp on Monday and Tuesday. One part that I really enjoy is after the first day of push, we go through what was the experience like, and then we ask them, what do you think this thing could do at the end of the second day? And then people are like, yeah, maybe we can improve a little bit, and then we do the magic trick at the end of day 2. It's like, that what you thought this could be at the first day. We hinted a little bit of what the hidden capacity truly is, and there's usually disbelief in the room. And then just your point, what is usually the magic at the end of the bootcamp experience? What is the tension in the room?
It's your typical break you down, build you back up again, right? Like that's the secret sauce. And I've partaken in experiential exercises that have done that are similar to bootcamp but not exactly the same, and had a tremendous impact on me. I to this day haven't forgotten them, whether they be on public speaking or I've done a ton of parenting courses over the years. I got 4 kids. I can always improve my parenting skills. But I think the real pinnacle for the bootcamp experience goes back to that breaking you down first and recognizing, well, maybe everything I'm doing is not giving us what we need. And that's not individually. It is individually, but also as a team. Yeah. How we communicate, how we dissect a problem, how we make decisions, our alignment or lack of, the goals that we're setting, like all the things that you can literally go onto Google and figure out and get a template for. Yeah. But when it comes down to actually implementing, a little bit of a foreign concept. So all those pieces coming together, bootcamp's really great at level setting where you are right now, and then showing that pathway to where you can go. And it's not gimmicky. I think it was built off of real life experiences, right? And real examples. So that hidden capacity piece that you're talking about is, the whole point is really just to reflect to the participants that within your own organization, there is this hidden potential. Yeah. And it sounds super corny, but it's true. It's just sitting there waiting to be discovered. And our whole, facilitation technique, and I think greater pitch for using our system, is that you can find it. You don't need Tatham to find it for you. You don't need any other consulting firm to come and find it for you. In fact, it'll be a disservice even if they did find it for you. You find it on your own. There's a tremendous sense of pride that you're going to get. And so the bootcamp experience really is just revealing that type of mindset, which is give you the confidence, the tools, the techniques, the language to be able to have the confidence to tackle some of these problems that were impossible. Right? And I think, again, that theoretical capacity or that hidden capacity, when you look at it on day one and you're feeling how it felt in Push Corporation, I mean, you think it's impossible. But I think that's no different than what you think in your own organization. It's too bureaucratic. There's too many steps. There's too many rules and regulations. We're too heavily regulated. I mean, I could go on with excuses of why things are the way they are. Yeah. I hear them all the time. There's always a path. There's always a solution to the problem. It's just figuring out how to get there. And I think that's really what that bootcamp experience is doing, is it's helping them get to that solution.
Yeah, I think like you said, I went through it as a participant, as a team member, and now as a coach. Like you said, it's breaking it down and then building it back up again, because the most prominent excuse, and that excuse probably the best, we've done that forever, or we've always done it that way. It made us successful. Why should we change it? And just that transitioning into launching a team, the most critical part for me as a team to succeed under the systematic method is you give them the permission to ask why, to start questioning 100%. What they do. Yeah. And so just guide us through what a team launch looks like, and especially how we set up teams. What is the time that they do? What are they allowed to do?
Yeah, I know I kind of veered off a little bit, but I think is all part of a podcast. But you'd asked before about time frames, and like honestly, it's probably the biggest challenge doing this work right now, is that we have clients that are minimal, they have limited capacity.
Always.
Right? That's always a challenge. I mean, you always will have limited capacity when you're running a push organization. Yes. Right? So you're asking me to take my people out of what they're doing, for them to fix the system that's working, but it's a chicken and egg. You don't take them out and resolve the problem. They're just going to be stuck in the same problem, and they'll never have the capacity. And you're either going to have to hire more to come into the system, which it can be like a black hole and just suck them in, or you're going to have to, take the hit a little bit and pull them out to resolve it so that it's done once and for all. So from our perspective, we'll meet our clients where they're at. If they're going to say, look, we want to launch one day a month, we're probably going to say, don't bother. Yeah. But if you can get some of the key individuals involved in whatever process they're selecting, and get at least a couple of days a week, a rhythm where they can tackle this problem, then we're looking at a success. I mean, ideally it's full-time, but the reality is most organizations can't give up people full-time. So especially like a hospital, you've got surgeries as a doctor, you've got patients and whatnot, but you got to get enough of a rhythm with the team to be able to tackle that problem, because rhythm is, as you know, flow and rhythm is a big part of doing this work.
Absolutely. Maybe just for our listeners, how do you pitch it to leaders or to managers? Because even if a leader says, hey, I believe in what you're trying to sell me here, but still the middle management is usually in charge of their resources. And like you said, in the push culture, you always try to throw resources or money at a process that doesn't work, but you hope that more people, more money solve the problem. Yeah. So what is your pitch in trying to change that mindset into, okay, I'll take out a little resource, I might jeopardize my short-term success, but how do I get this pitch into, okay, I jeopardize my resources, but long-term it might help? What's your pitch, or how do you address that?
That's a really tough question, because it's sort of circumstantial. Depending on the leader. Let's talk about typically. So why it's so important to get a senior leader to be the sponsor, because at the end of the day, there's that accountability piece. Yeah. So if the leadership team, when the leadership team comes out of the executive bootcamp experience, the first thing we're doing is we're saying, look, is this something you think you can do? Do you want to try it? As soon as the answer yes comes, there's that accountability piece that comes in. So as a leader, if you're going to be the champion, for example, you have to give up resources. We'll still negotiate on what that looks like and how many days a week, and is it full-time versus part-time, and depending on how much time they can put forward, would also it would affect the scope of the initiative as well. You can't go too big too quickly with limited resources. That's just an equation for failure. So I think hands down, the bootcamp experience starts this. So they see the value there, so they're kind of bought into that. But even then, it's the whole, I love this stuff, just don't do it in my area. Right? So I think that the way we get around that is it goes back to the sponsor. And I've got a pretty good way, depending on who we're dealing with. If they're choosing something that's a burning platform, usually it's like, look, you've been at this for, let's call it 18 months. You haven't had much headway on it or progress. So maybe it's time to try something different.
Maybe.
So again, it's circumstantial, but I think inevitably it has to go back to the executive sponsor, starting with accountability. And then, so it is a little bit of push to get to pull, which is quite natural. But yeah, it often starts with choosing someone, again, who's an early adopter. And that's all part of the strategic decision around this. Like there's the recipe, but then there's also the strategic lens at the top, to make sure you have the right people in the right places to get that momentum, right? And those early adopters are a big part of that.
Definitely. So we found someone that is actually crazy enough to fund such a first team.
Crazy.
Have to be crazy to put people through, empower them to ask why, and actually maybe question their decisions. Yeah. But coming back to the team, we set up teams in a very distinct way. Mm-hmm. So we have the team members that are usually subject matter experts, frontline workers that know their business. Right. But there's another crucial role. That's the role of the coach.
Right.
Could you just outline what the coach in the Tatham systematic method does, or what the purpose of the coach is, and especially in the team setup?
Yeah, absolutely. So the coach is the guide, right? In this whole story, the coach is the guide, not the hero.
Yeah.
Right. That's really important to remember if anyone knows about storyboard telling. So the coach has got an intimate knowledge of the method, obviously, but unlike an internal consultant or a business analyst or anyone like that, the coach is not there to tell the team what to do. Just as in a boot camp, I'm not there to, or the coach or the facilitator of boot camp is not there to point out all the mistakes and tell them what they need to be doing next. You're using Socratic questioning, you're using the method to guide them in the right direction. But ultimately, what they find, I'll tell you, for the most part, when I'm working with new teams, unless it's been the exact process I worked on before, which I tend to not like to do, I have no idea where they're going.
Yeah.
I'll openly admit that. I know that's like a faux pas, and this is why I go back to we're not really consultants, is a consultant's brought in, they have industry expertise, they have an out-of-the-box solution, and they're bringing it to the table. I'm saying I have no idea what the outcome is going to look like. Absolutely none. When we're working with NASA, do you think we know how to launch satellites?
You look like you do it.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, you look at the boot camps we have with NASA, half of them had, their PhDs by the time they were 20 years old. Right? Which takes most people a lifetime. They did in just a few years of their lives. So these are very smart people. Not just NASA. Every organization has very smart people. So the role of the coach is not to be there to tell them what to do or indoctrinate them or do any of those things. They're meant to be a guide. Yeah. They're meant to be there to enlighten them, to get them to challenge the status quo, if anything. Right? That's the biggest piece. It's your point. Why? Why do we do things this way? And yes, it's going to upset people. It naturally will, especially if I'm someone who's put a procedure or process in place, and maybe I had to do it under the current data that I had at the time, and it was the best decision. And then suddenly this team comes along of really frontline workers, individual contributors, and they're asking me why? I'm a middle manager. How dare you ask me why? That's a tough thing for a lot of individual contributors to do. You need a guide. You need the champion. You need that whole system and structure to be able to properly and respectfully challenge the status quo, so that you can come out the other end with a super innovative solution, right? It's all a recipe, like I said before. You can't not put one of the ingredients in, because if you don't, that whole thing could go in the wrong direction. Yeah. It could ruin the meal, if you will. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And just personally, if you like being a coach and having coach teams, if you reach a point where middle managers or people are not offended or not feeling uncomfortable, you're not on the right track.
That's true.
It has to hurt to a certain extent, because then you know you're on the right track.
That's right.
If you ask why enough, and usually when the last answer is because we've always done it that way, then you know, okay, now we're in a place where the magic happens. That's a good place.
I mean, that's spot on, Tim. I love that. That's we say the same thing about implementation. We've talked about this before. Yeah. The same thing about implementation. The teams come away, they've gone through this journey, however, whether it be full-time or part-time, they have this tremendous improvement proposal. Then it's like, now we got to implement.
Yes.
And then I hear from them, we're good on implementation. We don't need any help. I'm like, well, how's implementation going? And it's like, it's working perfectly. And I'm like, well, that means it's not working at all. Because to your point, it really should be shaking things up a bit.
Yeah.
Not a bit, a lot. It's challenging old ways of operating. It's challenging leadership. It's challenging operations. It's challenging procedures. It's challenging governance. A whole lot of different things. So shaking the tree is gonna be disruptive.
I mean, right? That would be great if we were coming from an improvement proposal. Hey, we love that. We see your data. You're telling a great story. There's your implementation. In 2 weeks, we have everything that you want in place, and we can improve it. Usually, it's something different, and I probably you can agree on that. It's usually you have an end-to-end process that you now started getting into a pull mindset, and then you hit the point where, geez, we now have to implement, and everything around us still thinks differently.
You're right. I know this is not maybe necessarily part of our subject here, but I have to mention this. It's like, is this a transition? The best transition I can think of is like here are Canadians here, because our office is based in Toronto. Our winters are brutal, right? Sometimes it's like 20 below zero. And other times we have so much snow you can't even get out of your front driveway or plow off your car. The opportunity to go somewhere south where it's nice and warm is like unbelievable. Many who live in these locations, it's like they take it for granted. For us, we love it because like we're just so exposed to so much. Our winters feel like forever. That transition of going from really warm and beautiful back to here is a super difficult transition for us. That's the best analogy I can use for a team that's been in this incubation period where they're innovative and they're running the team like clockwork. They're doing touch points. They're not having unnecessary meetings. This is really the high performance side of building a team. As you can see, we're trying to incubate. right? Build a team internally, teach them the fundamentals of how to perform as a high performance team. And then suddenly they're released back into a push organization. And it's like me coming back into 20 below zero after sipping a margarita on the beach. It's like a hard transition, you know?
Yeah, coming from questioning everything, having data, construct a story, and then it's like, throw it over the fence and we might pick it up in a year,
that's disheartening.
Never. Yeah, definitely. It's like, I said it in the podcast, in the first episode, the most empowering thing is to allow people to ask why and see them coming out of their shells, waking up, doing the best they can. But trust me, the most disheartening thing is having them present to their leaders, being very passionate about it and being proud of their work. And then you throw it over the fence and nothing happens.
And no one catches it. Yeah. Well, that's why it's so important, as you know, that's why it's so important to go through all the discipline, use all the same discipline and using the scientific method in the same way to design as you do to implement.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same process. You're still experimenting, you're still measuring, you're doing all those kind of things. You don't just give it to an implementation team who's not done that before.
Yeah.
Right? And I think also, I could get into a whole lot of detail on this, but involving those that either participated in the boot camp or were part of the original design team in implementation is really important. So even if they're not necessarily going to be the ones leading the implementation, so let's say they're a team member who's going to be actually following it, number one, they're going to sell it to their colleagues because like, look, all those things we talked about that we could never do, I took your ideas and I brought them to the table, we're implementing them now. And we have a reason why, and we can measure, and we have data to prove it. So guess what? We get to do this from now on. And they're ecstatic.
Yeah, definitely.
So the only thing that's in the way is a middle manager sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes they embrace it. But the only person who will be in the way is a middle manager or some other team members that love push.
That love their old way
of doing things. That love the old ways of doing things. And then look, now you have the perfect opportunity, and this is kind of another byproduct of doing this work, is as a coach, the leadership development opportunities. You get some high potential leaders. You get them exposed to different parts of the business, working with team members, coaching them, guiding senior leaders. Like that whole thing is the perfect setup for becoming a senior leader in the organization, right?
Plus you're giving one crucial thing away of the method is, you're on yourself, you're the president, CEO of the company. Your brother John is running the marketing side. You have me as a methodology fellow. You have Eddie on the Tatham Health side, and we'll come back in another episode. And you have your intern, Leo. You're running the show on your own. And that's why coaching the coach is such a crucial part of the experience. And you just alluded to it. You want to install the method into an organization to make it their own.
Yeah, self-sufficient.
Self-sufficiency, exactly.
Yeah, but also at the same time, Eddie, who I hope at some point we can even bring into these conversations, he's leading a co-founder of TC Health, which is a division of Tatham that's specifically working with the healthcare industry. He's an inspiring guy, unbelievable. One of the things we talked about is I think a lot of organizations talk about training and team building, and then it's like you provide it and then you leave. And then you kind of get stuck, and then you're in a place where you're not continuously improving. So a great thing about our system is that it's a lifelong relationship. We're able to be there with the client, hand-holding them through new leaders coming in, new innovative techniques and whatnot. That's the kind of relationship you want to have, right?
Yeah, and just picking up the horrific picture that I painted in the first episode, you plant a virus to spread in the organization.
We might have to get away from that analogy.
Well,
I know John's like, I'm not putting that on any marketing material.
Why not?
And the other ones that's super cliche is we're going to make this part of our DNA. What does that mean? Well, it just means we got a really good way of doing this now, and it gives us a lot of results, and we enjoy doing it, so let's do it now. I think that's the simplest way of explaining it, honestly. But yeah, the transformation where really you start to make that transition to a pull organization with pull leadership is when you start to build the capability, right? And you start to find individuals like yourself, within your organization who have a high potential, who love this work, who love working with others in the business, and who really get a tremendous sense of reward watching the teams be successful, who love giving away credit. And there's not many of those in an organization. So if you can find them, highly recommend you get a hold of them and you put them in this coach position, because it is that tour of duty that is the best accelerated learning you can imagine. It really is. It's just phenomenal.
Definitely. Like, even though you wouldn't think about it, because I always bring up the virus, and John is looking at me very candidly.
No,
don't use the virus analogy, but storytelling is a very crucial part, especially of the improvement proposal, and way beyond that.
Yeah.
So what makes an improvement proposal successful or concise for you in your perspective?
Purpose, the why, I think, is obviously the most. You've beaten that drum many times. Simon Sinek's book, the why. If you don't have the why, then you're dead in the water. So I think that's a really important part, is the team coming together, what the purpose was. Obviously, we talked about the mandate before. So a mandate brings a big piece of the why in. The story has to revolve around the customer and the team members. Those are the two most important groups. I'm not saying put one ahead of the other. You've probably heard of happy customer means happy employees, right? Absolutely agree with that. But I've also seen really happy employees and not very happy customers. So I'm just going to say they're both really important.
Yeah.
So I think the big thing that makes improvement proposals, and I've seen some phenomenal ones to the point where they get emotional. They're so good. And you were leading the helm on quite a few of them over the years. So you'll know this. I think the biggest piece is they have that North Star, that mandate, and they connect on a level to the customer that they've never connected before. And what happens is that, plus the bootcamp experience and the confidence to tackle a problem that I think many organizations would never allow their individual contributors or frontline employees to tackle, it's such a special thing to watch, because they're telling the story about where they were, which is a push organization, or where the problems resided within the customers and the stakeholders. And the stakeholders also mean employees and leaders. And then they show this transition to where it was. And the best part, which I think is even better than the solution, is why it is the way it is, how it got there, and really understanding the detail of how it evolved, all the way through to now that we understand why it is the way it is, and we can actually address it with this simple solution. Right? That whole story. And not done in a slide presentation. I mean, I can't tell a client, don't put them in slides. But traditionally, what I've really loved is just Post-it notes up on a wall, telling a story, going through it systematically, and no one forgets it, because it is so impactful. Learning about what the team went through, and then also all of the individual journeys that each team member went through from the moment they went to boot camp to that very day. It's just an incredible thing. So I would say that would probably be the most important aspect of the improvement proposal.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's your composing, where you're gathering such a massive amount of data, whether it's what your customer want, what their feedback is, or maybe where their pain points are. You have a look at the process, you try to understand it, gather the data, and then some crazy things happen. You try to put the process and the data that you have together, try to draw conclusions or have cause and effect analysis, what is the effect that we see, the negative effect for the customer, what could be potential root causes. You have experiments around it, you experiment with data, you experiment with your customer, and it's a very data and systematically driven process to come to your conclusions and to your proposals. And what I find is they are so concise that usually in an organization it's like, I have an idea, we get a system on board, I have a quick business case around it, I think that's the benefit that we have, off you go, and then never picked up on. But this way of constructing an improvement proposal in a systematic, data-driven way, the only thing that could say a no is, I'm emotional. And an emotional no is never a strong no. It's like the team comes together, puts these things together, and has an improvement proposal that blasts everyone out of the room. That's at least what I saw.
I actually, I think it was it yesterday or was this week? I think it was Monday or Tuesday, because I usually do, I put a post on LinkedIn on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I just told a quick story, and it was during boot camp, and then I posted it because it was just such an important moment in my career. I remember it must have been like maybe 3 or 4 teams in my career at the early stages. And I worked with this one team. It was in Austin, Texas. And I would wake up each morning here in Toronto and travel at like 3 a.m. I'd have to get up to get to Atlanta to get to Austin. And so every week I'm with them Monday to Friday for about 6 weeks. And so they had their improvement proposal. And this was a long, rigorous process. Like it had multiple stakeholders, tons of places to go wrong, right? And I think the scope, even looking back, was a bit much, but boy, did this team tackle it well. So the idea was that everyone was coming into this thinking, this is such a complex process. It was an estate settlement process, right? This is and it is. If anyone knows anything about an estate settlement process, it is highly complex, especially for high net worth customers that this bank had. So this team got peeled away for, I think it was about 8 weeks, which really wasn't enough. But boy, did they come up with a phenomenal solution. And it was multiple solutions for different work streams within this entire scope, to the point where when the sponsor and the champion were sitting in the room and they had told their story, the sponsor stood up, who happened to actually be the CEO, and he says, what you're telling me is this complex process that we've been going after and probably spent tens of millions of dollars of consultant fees and your time and my time, and it's been just a complete drain. You're telling me it all boils down to your story and those simple solutions? And kind of everyone's sitting back in their chairs going, uh-oh, this isn't sophisticated enough for him. And I remember the team leader, who probably never even met the CEO at this point, stood up with the utmost confidence and said, yes, sir, that's exactly what we're telling you. And he said, well, all right, then let's get this implemented. And so that story really encompasses the value of going through this journey. And I think also the confidence that these team members get, because they're looking at things at a level that they never have been able to do before, because they're so busy firefighting and rescuing things, that now they finally have the time to sit down and properly understand what's going wrong and design a much more efficient way of doing things. So
thank you so much for that story. It's a perfect roundout for this episode.
Yeah.
Team was empowered. After the 8 weeks, they felt empowered to stand behind what they found, and the CEO that understood what the process was, and that he just has to say, yes, I trust the people that I put the time, money, and confidence in. And apparently the results spoke for themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. I think that's a wrap for the second episode of our podcast. And yeah, link back in when we talk about why this method works, or why we do that thing, and come back for the third episode. Thank you, Michael, for your time.
Thanks, Tim.